Good morning, good afternoon. We are live. I'm so excited to be here again. Oh my goodness, you are in for a treat. Welcome to our program, Leadership Behaviors That Foster Psychologically Safe Teams. We had so much to talk about in March that we decided we needed a part two for this subject. So we are here again. And so I'm super excited to hear guests. Audience, we want to ask you to let us know you're here in the comment section. Tell us where you're coming in from. Thank you so much for investing in yourself today to be with us. As we go through the program, we want to encourage you to ask questions and give us comments, and we're going to try really hard to address them. We have so much to cover. I'm Michelle Beauchamp. My company's called The Champ Group. And what I love to do is help people unleash their inner champ, particularly in the areas of leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm super excited to introduce you again to these phenomenal panelists that we have today. I want to have them introduce themselves. And you know what? When you hear a little bit about them, you're going to say, yeah, this was definitely worth it. So thank you again for joining us today. So Vanessa, can you give our audience a couple of sentences about what is it that you do, Vanessa?
Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Kelly. I'm an employment attorney with Clark Hill with over 30 years of experience. I work with clients on all kinds of employment compliance, their DE&I efforts, and I represent them if unfortunately they get sued in response to any kind of employment issue. But my passion is to help them have a respectful workplace so that they avoid a lot of the litigation risks that people have.
Okay, respectful workplace. That means that it needs to be a psychologically safe environment. Exactly. So thank you, Vanessa. Shout out to some of our guests here. We've got Barbara Ann here. We've got Julie here. We've got Charlene. We've got Tom Drucker. Oh my goodness. And Tom was on our other call, and I think Charlene was too. And thank you so much for coming back again. Whoop, whoop. Okay, so Trina, tell us, what is it that you do?
Good morning, Michelle. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for having me back. My name is Trina Fleming. I'm with Lendistry. Lendistry is a minority-led small business lending company, one of the only minority-led ever SBLC in the country. And we provide capital to businesses that are run by minorities and underserved populations. As the VP of Employee Engagement, Training, and Corporate Responsibility, my job is to make sure that we attract and retain top talent in every way possible.
All right, Trina, that's a mouthful. That's a big responsibility. Big responsibility. Thank you again for coming back. And then we have Loretta. So, Loretta, tell us, what is it that you do, Loretta?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Loretta Jordan. I am the Assistant Vice President of Student Services at Santiago Canyon College in East Orange, Orange County, California. And I have been in higher education for 32 years, growing and developing and matriculating students. And in addition to that, I have a doctorate in psychology and a psychotherapy practice, as I guess you would now call it a side hustle, whereby I provide therapeutic services for individuals, and I specialize in couples counseling, couples therapy.
Okay. All right. Wow. So, audience and guests, as you can see, we've got a power packed panel here. And again, I'm so grateful that you all said yes again. We are so passionate about this subject of psychological safety because it impacts everybody, whether people are leaders and it's their responsibility to create a safe and inclusive culture for their team, or you work there and you want to feel comfortable and safe coming to work every day, whether you work in person, hybrid, or virtual. And even when you're a leader, you probably have somebody else that you report to. So this topic affects everybody, and we are very passionate about it. I want to share a quote from the CEO of Google. He said this: psychological safety is not about just being comfortable. It's about having confidence that you won't be punished for making mistakes. That sums it up. And when we met the first time in March, I just want to recap a little bit about some things that we talked about before, some behaviors that leaders should embrace, some essential behaviors. One was setting the temperature. It's the leader's responsibility to set the temperature, set the tone for the culture of that organization or that department. We talked about the importance of language. Trina, you talked about us and we, not I, right? So not I and me. So the importance of language when we're communicating with our team. We talked about the Supreme Court rule. Vanessa, you talked being an attorney, you talked about the Supreme Court rule. And it really, if I remember correctly, it was about everybody gets an opportunity to talk, right? She's nodding her head, so that's right. We also talked about the importance of empathy. We know that we need to be empathetic. We might not feel that way. We might not have experienced that. And we need to understand what that means. The importance, too, of asking questions, which also means we need to be good listeners. So there are so many responsibilities. Communicate expectations was also something I think, Trina, you brought up to minimize confusion. In other words, if we're clear on what we want, then people won't worry about making a mistake. They'll be able to ask us for clarity along the way. And then I remember, Loretta, you talked about allowing space for people to be fully engaged. In other words, don't just jump into a meeting and get going. There might be some things that they're dealing with on a personal level that minimize their ability to immediately connect. And that's going to bring me to the current month. We recognize a lot of things this month. One of the things we recognize is Asian American Pacific Islander Month, AAPI, right? And we are very aware of all the Asian hate that's been going on. So we recognize that this month so we can minimize that hate. We also recognize in the month of May, Jewish Awareness Month. Again, there's a lot of hate. There's a lot of things going on that make people feel uncomfortable, sad. And the other thing we're recognizing is Mental Health Awareness Month. And all these areas that we're talking about that we recognize, they have to do with our mental health. They have to do with our ability to feel safe in our job, right? And so we recognize so many things. And Vanessa, another thing you said, I think that was recognized was, what'd you say?
It's a National Cocktail Month as well. So I'm not recommending that as a coping skill for mental health issues, but I just thought it was funny that it falls in with some of these other celebrations, at least in my social feed. So
That's funny. That's funny. So there are so many things we recognize. We want to focus right now too on what Dr. Tim Cook wrote a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And so I've studied a lot under that and in this subject and in that book. I want to talk about stage 1, which is inclusion. And so when we think about inclusion, you know what that means? It means we feel like we belong, right? We feel like, you know what? This is the place for me to work. I feel accepted. I feel like I belong. So really psychological safety does have to do with being okay, being rewarded for being vulnerable, right? So Loretta, I think you had something to share about what kind of behavior or what you do to help people feel included.
Right. Inclusion, and as you mentioned, Michelle, one of the cornerstones of psychological mental health and wellness and balance is feeling belonged, as is security. So we need to feel secure and we need to feel belonged. So those have to be coupled together in order for us to create this environment for people to then set all of their apprehensions in the back seat and relax enough to feel that they can be positive contributors and be accepted. Because with inclusion, we all come to the table with filters of our own understanding of where we come from, but we as well have to have that of others. So then, where does one's culture play into their response? Where does one's background, their history, their ethnicity come into their response? Are we becoming offended and not realizing, oh, well, this is their cultural language. This is their cultural system of communication. All of that is valid. And likewise, we're communicating as well. How are we coming across and they interpreting our messages as we filter it through our culture? So inclusion means we pause just for a moment to identify where is this coming from. It may be from a cultural context and it's valid. And therefore don't become, so we're not offended by it or we're not taken aback by it. And we're responding to a message that wasn't sent.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that what I hear you say too is we need to have a lot of empathy, and that's one of the traits that we talked about. And that's how we learn from each other, right? Rather than judging because they're different than us, we want to help everybody feel like they belong together. So thank you for that. Thank you for that example.
Yeah, everyone has an.
Hey, Michelle, can I just add a little something? I think I look at it also as it's more than just inviting people to the dance, right? Because
Yeah.
you can invite someone to the dance and they can be included, but do they feel like they belong because you've asked them to dance? It's one thing to just show up. It's another, and I think we talked about this last time, actually being intentional about reaching out to someone to ask their opinion because you know that they may not feel safe about giving it, right? So they're at the table, but if they're at the table and they don't feel safe enough to speak at the table,
Right.
they don't really feel included,
Like they
right? But we
belong,
sometimes companies feel like we've checked the box
for
because
sure.
they're at the table, but
Absolutely.
that's not the whole story.
No, you know what? You're right, Trina. And that brings us to the next phases. I like how these stages go because when you are at the table, are you okay to learn, right? What are we doing to help people learn? Because here's the thing, we are all a work in progress. None of us have all the answers. And so we want to make sure that we create an environment, a culture where people can learn, where, in other words, they can say, I'm not sure I understand. I don't really get it, right? And so, Trina, you just conducted training at your company a couple of weeks ago. And so, what I'm curious
Mhm.
about is how did you create that safe space to learn when you were training? How did you create that safe space?
I think, and I talked a little bit about this, part of it was the language. So when I talk about different topics and things that we're learning, I always talk about we're learning. To your
Mm,
point, just because I'm conducting the training doesn't mean I'm an expert at
mm,
all costs. It doesn't mean I'm not still learning. It doesn't mean that I don't have room for improvement. So the training was on critical thinking, problem solving, decision making. So I talked about the things that we are learning, the things where we can improve, and I also gave some examples of myself, of mistakes I had made, where I've learned, where I've grown, which kind of opened it up for people to say, oh, you know what, I've made that mistake too, or yeah, I could grow in that area too. So I think when people see the person who is giving the training, or the person who is running the company, or the person who is managing the department, being willing to say, hey, these are some of the mistakes I've made. These are some of the places where I've learned. I think that enables people to be okay to, first of all, admit that they don't know. And
right.
then second of all, feel safe to learn, admit mistakes, and take it to the next level for sure.
And you know what? It takes a lot of courage to say, I made a mistake, especially as the person who's
Mhm.
conducting the training or the leader. And to your point, it relieves other people because they're like, okay, if you're
Yeah.
willing to admit it, then guess what? Me too. And it totally creates the bond and the rapport. And that's such a great example of having creating a safe space. So really appreciate you sharing that. I want to talk about the next stage then, and this kind of goes into what you were saying before, Trina, about you're at the table, but do you get a chance to speak? And so this is called the contributor stage, where it means, I have an idea. And during our last program, I mentioned to you all that I remember I had a boss and I had an idea, and I told my boss, I have this idea. She said, yeah, you know what? We need you to stay in your lane. We don't really need you to come up with those kind of ideas. So obviously that wasn't inspiring, that wasn't motivating, and it didn't make me feel safe. So being able, knowing that you can raise your hand and you can say, hey, have you thought about this? Vanessa, I think you have something to help us understand how to elevate that contributor stage and audience. I just want to remind you to add your comments and feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this content.
Sure. I mean, Michelle, my response to the boss that said that to you was, what, aren't I hired here to think? I'm supposed to think and contribute. Please do not check your brain at the door when you come in. That's
Exactly, right? Amen.
it's just plain silly. No, I'm very intentional when I want to make sure. Sometimes I work with attorneys who are less experienced than I am, and I'm very intentional about sort of sharing the wealth, making sure that I work with a variety of different attorneys so that all of them have opportunities to see and engage in, um, you know, good, meaningful work, have an opportunity to progress. opportunity to do some fun things as well as some of the drudgery, because not every assignment is really exciting and fun. But I try to divide that up too, so someone's not getting all the bad, not
Mm,
fun assignments. And then in meetings, I really try to look around and make sure everyone does participate, and I try to do that in a way that doesn't make the person feel like they're just put upon, but just to say, I notice you've been quiet over there, but
mm,
you
mhm,
you you tend to have some really great ideas. So if you're
mm,
comfortable and you have something to contribute, please, let me hear from you. And that usually evokes a response, and the person does have something good. And I recently did some training for our firm on allyship. You remember, Michelle, you helped train the trainers
right, right, right.
at my
Yeah.
firm. And one of the people said something really interesting. They said, you have to be inclusive because there's a lot of people who are introverts, and they're seeing and they're sitting there and they're taking it in, and they actually have really great perspectives and thoughts because they are quiet and doing so much listening. So you have to find a way to draw that out,
Mm,
so that you can have the benefit from everyone on your team. So I thought that was a
mm,
very good reminder and a
mhm,
very good self-observation on the part of the person who was, sharing her experiences with that.
mhm. That was good. And so what that says to me too is that one of the things that leaders need to do is be observant, right?
Yes,
Yeah, be observant and really be intentional about being inclusive. I mean, when you said, you make sure that you have different people work on different projects and you share the responsibilities. That's being inclusive. So I think
right.
these are all such examples of what psychological safety is about. And then now I want to go to stage number 4, and that's challenger. And then I see a question that I think is going to be appropriate for my audience. Challenger safety means bucking the status quo. I mean, you know what? And this is sometimes really takes courage. Like, we've done this policy, we've had this policy, we've had these procedures for the last 10 years. And I think that we've got another way that we could do this. That takes courage. So
Mhm.
having the ability to be included, to be at the table, to learn, to raise our hand and contribute, and then to challenge. When we have teams that fill all of these different stages, then we really do have psychologically safe teams. And Loretta, I think you wanted to add to this stage of challenger safety.
Yes, yes, absolutely. One of the other parts of our mental health and wellness is meaning. So I'm gonna begin with meaning. What does something mean to another person? The communication that we're receiving and giving. What does it really mean to us in relationships? If someone says something to us that we feel offended, is it, oh, well, I felt disrespected? Okay, well, why? What did that mean to you when I did this? So
Mm,
everything revolves around meaning. It's
mhm,
woven through all of our belief systems. So, likewise, if you look at the word challenge, what does that truly mean to another person? Now, societally, we're in a capitalistic society. Challenges, we're on it face to face. We're not side by side, right? So, we're
okay.
not a team when you hear the word challenge. We are
Mhm,
now opponents. So, if
mm,
you think of an opponent or an opposition perspective, you're already thinking of now I'm on guard. So if you enter into a challenge, you're already going to become defensive. So look at all the meanings that are wrapped and revolved around just that one word. I mean, this person challenged me in an open meeting. How dare they? Well, were they challenging you, or were they just asking for an opportunity to explore other options?
mhm. Good.
So
Yeah.
as leaders, we need to stand down and remove all of our armor to accept these things as opportunities to explore other options.
Yeah.
And likewise, when we give them, we propose them in the same like manner so that
Yeah.
people can psychologically relax and accept them. And in doing so, we are then changing our belief systems about
Mhm.
the entire concept.
I love that, removing armor. I know we have some background noise. I'm not sure what it is, so I
Oh,
hope our
yeah.
audience can hear okay. So I love that. Remove our armor. In other words, let's not look at it as being defensive.
Right.
Instead, let's look at it as an opportunity. We can grow.
Explore
We can
yeah,
we can
other
learn.
options.
We can grow, and you saw a comment that Charlene put in, which was, yeah, sometimes we get so used to things that it just becomes the norm for things. Here's an interesting question. So that's what Charlene said. Here's another one that she asked. What are some signs of psychologically unsafe teams? Um, Anybody wanna respond to that? Thank you so much for that of engagement?
I think that's a great question, Charlene. And I think when no one speaks up, when you ask for questions, when no one has any ideas, that's usually an issue because everyone normally has a question and idea. And I love what we were just talking about. I think one of the ways that you can help people feel safer is what happens when someone does speak up? What if someone does challenge you? How do you take that in front of the group? So if you kind of demonstrate, let's say someone challenges you and you don't agree at all with what they said, but how do you demonstrate that? So if like you might say something like, you know what, I really, really appreciate you speaking up. That shows, the type of leader you are. Let's take that, maybe we can take that offline or blah, blah, but I really appreciate that. In fact, I had a training one time and no one wanted to ask a question. So the first person who asked a question, not only did I thank them, but I gave them a gift card. You guys said, you know what? I'm going to give you a gift card for asking that question. So I had all kinds of questions after that.
Motivated people to speak up. There you go, right? And again,
You put the "what's in it for me" answer right there.
Totally. That's awesome. That's awesome. But again, you had to be observant. And so, Charlene, I'm really glad you asked that question because we have to pay attention. It's a lot involved in leadership. I want to talk a little bit about this too, safe to give and receive feedback. I actually I did a project with some colleagues last week with an organization where the question was asked, how are we doing as a team? And that required vulnerability, right? And safe space to speak up. And people would look around like, are you going to find this out, or is this going to be revealed? So having a safe environment to give and receive feedback is important because we have to receive it. People are going to tell us something that we might not want to hear. We have to have an open mind so that we're willing to receive it. And you know what? There are going to be many times where we want to give feedback. We want to make it safe for people to receive the feedback and to give the feedback. To that point that you just made, Trina, we want to make it okay for you to ask questions and deliver ideas and all the things that we've talked about so far. And Vanessa, I think you had something you wanted to add to that.
Sure. Another sign of a psychologically unsafe team is how employees are treated when they do fall short of the mark, when they do make
Yes.
mistakes. If everyone's afraid to make a mistake and mistakes are so heavily penalized, there can't be any growth. I think that's a sign of an unsafe team. In converse, I mean, look, nobody's 100% all the time. And as you said in the very beginning today, Michelle, part of psychological safety is that the leader provides clear expectations and so that people know what's expected. So when people do not meet those expectations, there needs to be a communication. Look, we all love positive feedback. It makes us feel good. We smile, we get a pep in our step, the whole thing.
Right.
But honestly, we probably do the most growth when
Mm-hmm.
we understand where we fell short on a project or where there's a growth opportunity. So our job as leaders is to communicate that in a way that inspires and instills growth and does not tear the person down. So to be concrete about it, give specific examples. Be very specific with your
Good.
feedback, not generalized, because when we're generalized, you didn't work hard enough on this. This looks like you just threw it together. Those are kinds of things that tend to denigrate and demoralize versus focusing on where the project just fell a little bit short. I also think it's important that the individual know how their project fits into the overall scope of this of what you're doing, what the team is doing, so that they understand the importance, and then they realize, oh, well, when my part wasn't quite up to snuff, I did let the whole team down, so it's going to inspire me to do a little bit better. So I think those are the way that you do it, and try to reframe for an individual who may start to say, oh my gosh, I'll never get this right, or I'm just the worst person. And there are some people who are like that. They just, they're very fragile when they receive feedback.
Right.
So then it's like, everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
What Trina had said before, she gave an example where she needed to work on something to her group when she was talking about it. So I think those are really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to have your emotions in check when you provide that.
Right.
Um,
That's another good one.
so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and if you're on the receiving end, try not to take it personally. I know
Right.
that's easier said than done. We
Right.
all don't like to hear when we have not met the mark, but it happens. We're not perfect.
Right.
And try to understand that the person who's talking to you, it's a difficult conversation. It really is. It's so much easier. I tell everyone, I'm so good at positive feedback. It's the constructive stuff I struggle with, and I
Exactly.
struggle with it. I struggle to communicate it in a way that's not going to hurt the person and that they are going to take the feedback and grow from it. So when you're in the receiving end of it, try to think about that and not block and just think about it and do ask, show that you're as interested in your career as the person giving you
Mm.
the feedback. Ask what can I do to do a better job next time? Are there
Mm-hmm.
additional
Mm-hmm.
resources? Is there more training? Should I have looked at something else to help me get this done? Can
Mm-hmm.
I see some examples of people who have done this job,
Right.
this particular project better? All of that so that you are taking the feedback in, you're open to it. And then later on, if sometimes people are so emotional, they really can't think of what to say. So, take that pause if you need it
Right.
and then
Oh yeah.
schedule a
Silence.
time to come back
Yeah.
and
The
address it.
silence.
So
Silence is
just
good.
sometimes you just have to know yourself. And if you know that you're not going to be able to have a productive conversation because you're worried about crying or or getting defensive, then just
Right. Take
have
a
that
break.
pause.
Exactly. And Loretta gave us some tips on breathing, which maybe we need to breathe. She said
Yeah.
478, right? So
Right.
breathe, right?
Right.
So wow, you
Right.
know what? I'm really glad. I'm really glad this is being recorded because there are a lot of nuggets in here. And I don't know if you saw, but I showed that Tom said, "This is a great conversation, Tom. We appreciate that. Thank you so
Mhm.
much." That's a mouthful that you just said, Vanessa.
Mhm.
There's so much involved in everything that we're talking about. That's why this is such an important topic. And when you really take a look and dig deep into it, many mistakes can happen. There's some examples in the airline industry and in the healthcare industry where, because people didn't feel safe to speak up, some huge mistakes happened because they were afraid to make a mistake or they were afraid to challenge or raise their hands. So this is such an important topic. We only have 3 minutes left. It's crazy, but
Mhm.
I want to talk just for a couple minutes here about being safe to speak up at meetings. Um, this is it. I mean, when you feel safe to speak up at meetings, then there are many benefits. And Trina, I think you had some specifics that you wanted to elaborate on. Can you share what some benefits have been for you and your team because it's been safe to speak up?
Thank you, Michelle. I think being safe to speak up in meetings is so critical, especially nowadays for business where innovation is really the name of the game. If a
Wow.
business isn't innovating, they're usually dying, right? If they're not becoming more efficient, they're usually on their way out. So you really need to gather information from other people in
Mhm.
order to keep your business moving forward. So we're talking about lack of innovation affecting bottom line. If your people don't feel safe enough to say, hey, we could do this a better way. Hey, have
Right.
you thought about this? When you think about all of the inventions that happened because someone was okay and felt safe enough just to try something else. And Michelle, what you talked about, people not speaking up because they didn't feel safe, has actually cost lives.
Yes.
So now we're talking about something even more serious than
Yeah.
bottom line.
Right.
So I think we have to make it safe. We have to find a way to make sure that people feel not only safe, but feel good about contributing to the bottom line of the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And something that's happening right now is layoffs. And this is making people feel unsafe, rightfully so. I've got a couple clients who, yeah, they've gone through layoffs, and some of the employees have talked about the impact that had on them. So before we wrap it up, and we just have about a minute, who has something they can offer to what leaders can do to help their employees feel safe during this changing time that we're in?
I would like to say transparency, give every bit of piece of information and details to the employee so they don't feel that there's deception involved. They're already dealing with the trauma of identifying where their lives are going to go and with regard to their livelihood. And it's always helpful to also identify what can be done after this. So if the information of the layoff is coupled with, and here are some resources that you can go to assist you in this transition, then that's always helpful.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, transparency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Abigail, who's behind our scenes, to put our slide up, because you know what, I just showed some of the amazing comments that that have been available, and we really appreciate the comments that y'all have had. We really do. We want you to be able to reach us if you want to have another conversation about this or anything else. We want to be able to establish relationships and get to know who joined us today. And we thank you so much for your comments. I want to wrap up with a summary from Ed Catmull from Pixar. He said, this sums up what we've talked about. Psychological safety is not about being nice. It is about candid feedback. We talked about that. Openly admitting mistakes. We talked about that. And learning from each other. And we want you to take those words and everything else we said. And you know what we know about those who came and joined us today is that you will carry the torch of creating psychologically safe teams so that together we can all feel productive and feel included, be safe to learn, raise our hands and challenge. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast, but make sure you get in touch with us. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you again. Thanks. Bye.